Someone has left the newborn baby on the grave of his deceased mother for 3 days. The sky was overcast, heavy clouds hanging low as if heralding an impending storm. A bitterly cold wind swept through the Los Angeles cemetery, making the bare, skeletal branches tremble. A thin mist blanketed the old gravestones, creating a chillingly eerie atmosphere. Frank Lopez, the cemetery caretaker, walked slowly between the rows of graves, his worn-out shoes sinking slightly into the damp earth. He had been doing this job for over 20 years, a quiet but deeply responsible duty. He wasn't afraid of ghosts, but there was one thing that unsettled him: silence. The cemetery was always peaceful in the morning, but today, something felt off. Frank stopped in front of a freshly dug grave, the grave of Maria Garcia, a woman who had passed away just 3 days ago. Her death had been a tragedy. Everyone in town had mourned Maria, a gentle woman whose life had been cut short. But it wasn't the memory of Maria that made Frank shudder, it was the thing lying on her grave. A newborn baby. Frank froze in shock. A tiny infant, wrapped in a thin cloth, lay motionless on the cold tombstone. The baby's skin was pale, almost bluish, and its breaths were so faint they were barely noticeable. A chill ran down Frank's spine. "Oh, dear God," he whispered, his hands trembling as he bent down to check on the baby. The moment his fingertips touched the child's icy skin, his heart clenched. There was no time to hesitate. He quickly scooped the baby into his arms, pressing it against his chest to share his warmth. "Hold on, little one. Don't give up." Staggering, he ran out of the cemetery, his voice breaking as he called for help. As Frank stumbled onto the main street, people turned to stare at him in shock. In the middle of the bustling market, Carmen Jimenez, the town baker, was arranging fresh bread on her shelves when she heard his desperate cries. She looked up and saw Frank, clutching a pale, lifeless baby, his face filled with panic. "What happened?" Carmen shouted. Frank panted heavily. "A baby. In the cemetery. On Maria's grave." For a moment, the crowd stood frozen in disbelief. Then, the town erupted into chaos. People screamed, horrified. Some rushed after Frank, while others hurried to call the police. Within 10 minutes, the piercing wail of an ambulance siren shattered the morning stillness. The vehicle screeched to a halt in front of Carmen's bakery, and 2 paramedics, Ryan Carter and Sophia Reed, jumped out. Ryan snatched the baby from Frank's arms and placed it on a portable stretcher. He pressed his ear to the baby's tiny chest, then looked up at Sophia, his voice urgent. "The heartbeat is dangerously weak. We need to get it to the hospital now." Sophia scanned the crowd, her eyes blazing with fury. Who could be so cruel as to abandon a baby like this? News of the discovery spread like wildfire. As the ambulance sped away, a sleek luxury car screeched to a halt in the middle of the town square. James Morgan, a wealthy businessman and the baby's father, stepped out, his expression cold and indifferent. The crowd glared at him with pure hatred. Everyone in town knew James was ruthless, but no one had expected him to be this heartless. Elena Garcia, Maria's younger sister, pushed through the gathering mob to confront him. "James. It was you, wasn't it? You abandoned the baby." James scoffed, his eyes devoid of emotion. "What nonsense are you babbling about, Elena? That child is yours. Maria carried it in her womb for 9 months. Elena screamed, her voice cracking with grief. James shrugged. "And she died because she was weak. I have no obligation to take on that burden." His words were like a dagger to the hearts of everyone present. Shock. Rage. Disbelief. The emotions on their faces were unmistakable. Carmen shouted, "You're a monster." As the argument escalated, Police Chief Michael Adams arrived. He slammed his palm against the hood of James's car, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "James Morgan, we need you to come to the station for questioning. Immediately." James smirked. Regarding what? The fact that your baby was left to die on its mother's grave, Michael growled. Suddenly, a frail voice spoke from the crowd. I heard crying last night. Everyone turned. It was Rosario, an elderly woman who lived near the cemetery. She trembled as she recounted her story. I thought it was just the wind. But no, it was the cry of a baby. A heavy silence settled over the town square. Frank murmured, his voice pained, that means the baby was left there, for 3 whole days. No one spoke. They all knew what that meant. The child had been abandoned to die. Elena screamed and lunged at James. You killed my sister, and now you want to kill your own child. The police had to restrain her while James remained completely unfazed, calmly adjusting his sleeve as if none of this concerned him. Michael issued a firm order, I will see this investigation through to the end. If James Morgan is involved, I swear he won't escape justice. James scoffed and opened his car door. Think whatever you want. But I have no obligation to that thing. He drove off, leaving behind a town drowning in outrage. The afternoon wore on, but the tension in the town remained thick. The story of the baby abandoned on its mother's grave had spread quickly, becoming the most infuriating scandal in years. Elena Garcia sat on a bench outside the hospital, her eyes red and swollen from crying, anger still burning in them. Beside her, Carmen Jimenez held her hand tightly in a gesture of comfort. He's not even human, Elena whispered, her voice trembling. Carmen nodded, her eyes filled with fury. You're right. But we have to do something. The police are investigating, but if there's no solid evidence, he'll get away with it. Evidence? Elena suddenly shot up, nearly screaming. Isn't the truth obvious? He abandoned my nephew. Carmen sighed. I understand, Elena. But the law won't convict him without concrete proof. Right now, James is still denying any involvement. I swear, I won't let him walk away from this. Elena clenched her fists, her eyes blazing with determination. Inside the emergency room, Dr. Ryan Carter and Sophia Reed monitored the infant's condition. After hours of emergency treatment, the baby remained in critical condition. Ryan silently reviewed the medical records, his face etched with concern. A baby boy, approximately 3 days old. Sophia froze. 3 days. Maria died 3 days ago. The 2 doctors exchanged bewildered glances. If their calculations were correct, the baby had been born on the same day his mother had died. This is too much of a coincidence, Sophia murmured. Could Maria have given birth right before she passed away? Ryan frowned. We need confirmation from forensics. But if this is true, then this situation is even worse than we thought. Sophia nodded, her face pale. If their suspicions were correct, then Maria might have been left to die right after giving birth, and the baby had been abandoned immediately afterward. Meanwhile, at the police station, James Morgan sat with his arms crossed, his face completely indifferent, as if he were merely being inconvenienced by a trivial matter. Police Chief Michael Adams slammed a file onto the table, his voice stern. We have a witness who heard a baby crying the night Maria died. Do you have anything to say about that? James sneered, leaning back in his chair. What exactly am I supposed to explain? I wasn't there. Michael stared at him. Don't you feel any responsibility for this child? James shrugged. I don't want it. Maria is dead, and I have no obligation to raise that burden. Michael slammed his fist on the table so hard that documents scattered onto the floor. That child is your son. James didn't flinch. He merely smirked. So what? If I don't acknowledge him, who's going to force me to raise him? Outside the interrogation room, Elena was eavesdropping, gripping the chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. The moment she heard his words, a surge of fury erupted within her. She couldn't hold back any longer. She stormed into the room. "James, you bastard. You don't deserve to be a father." James slowly turned to face her, his gaze sharp and cold. "What now, Elena? Another one of your tantrums?" "A tantrum?" Elena screamed. "My nephew nearly died, my sister died unfairly, and you still dare to deny your responsibility?" James folded his arms, his voice dripping with mockery. "Your sister was weak, so she died. That baby has nothing to do with me." Elena burst into tears, her chest heaving with rage. "You truly are a monster." The police had to hold Elena back before she could lunge at James. The entire holding cell was filled with fury, but James remained completely unfazed. After the interrogation, Michael Adams returned to his office. He sat down in his chair, rubbing his forehead in exhaustion. Something wasn't right. He called in the young officer, Alexander Roberts. "Alexander, I want you to check the security cameras around the cemetery. We need to find out who brought the baby there." Alexander nodded. "I'll get on it right away, Chief." As Alexander left, Michael sat in silence for a long time, his mind filled with thoughts. James was too calm, too composed. He was either a monster or someone so confident that no one could ever pin anything on him. Michael made up his mind. "I will find out the truth." Elena sat by the hospital bed, silent tears streaming down her face. She gently held her nephew's tiny hand, feeling its fragile warmth. "I will protect you, Matthew," she whispered. "No matter what happens, I won't let you suffer any more pain." At that moment, the door swung open. Sophia Reed stepped in, holding a folder in her hands. "Elena." Sophia hesitated. "We have a problem." Elena looked up, startled. "What problem?" Sophia sighed. "James has declared that he doesn't want to raise the baby, but he also refuses to let you adopt him. He's hiring a lawyer to block you." Elena's eyes widened in shock. "That's impossible." Sophia nodded, her face filled with anger. "He wants control without responsibility. If you don't fight, he might be able to take away your rights." Elena clenched her fists, her rage rising. "I won't let him do that. I will fight to the end." Elena Garcia stood still at the hospital room's door, staring at her nephew lying motionless in the incubator. He was so weak, so small that he looked like he could disappear at any moment. She clenched her fists, struggling to suppress the suffocating feeling in her chest. She couldn't break down. She had to fight for the boy. Beside her, Sophia Reed gently placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. "The doctors will do their best. But the baby's condition is still very critical." Elena nodded, her voice trembling. "I won't let him fall into James's hands." Sophia sighed. "You need to prepare for a tough legal battle. James has money and power. He can make things much harder than you think." Elena turned to look at Sophia, her eyes burning with determination. "I don't care. I'll do whatever it takes to keep Matthew with me." At the police station, Alexander Roberts was reviewing the security camera footage near the cemetery. The videos played one after another on the screen, but nothing seemed suspicious. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "There's nothing here." Just then, the door swung open. Mrs. Rosario, an elderly woman who lived near the cemetery, walked in, trembling. I have something to say." Alexander looked up and motioned for her to sit down. "Go ahead, Mrs. Rosario." The old woman took a deep breath, her voice shaky. "That night, I couldn't sleep, so I sat by my window. I remember clearly, around 3 in the morning, I heard a baby crying." Alexander held his breath. "A baby crying? From the cemetery?" Mrs. Rosario nodded. "At first, I thought it was just the wind. But then I heard footsteps. Someone was there, in the darkness. Alexander quickly took notes. Did you see anyone? Mrs. Rosario shook her head. No. But I saw a shadow, tall, broad, walking very fast. Alexander gripped his pen tightly. If what you're saying is true, that means the baby was left on the grave for at least 3 days. Mrs. Rosario burst into tears, her voice choked with guilt. I should have checked. I should have gone outside. But I thought I was just imagining things. Alexander gently held her hand. You've helped us a lot. We will find out who did this. After taking Mrs. Rosario's statement, the police intensified their search of the security cameras around the area. This time, they found something suspicious. In a blurry video recording, a shadowy figure stealthily appeared near the cemetery gate at dawn. He was carrying a bundle of cloth, walking hastily. Alexander stared intently at the screen, his heartbeat pounding. There it is, the person who brought the baby to the cemetery. He immediately printed an image from the footage and rushed to the office of Police Chief Michael Adams. Michael examined the picture carefully before looking up at Alexander. What do you think? Alexander gritted his teeth. That figure, it looks a lot like one of James Morgan's subordinates. Michael nodded. But we need more evidence. A blurry video alone won't be enough to convict him. Leaning back in his chair, his eyes turned icy. I want James monitored closely. He won't get away this time. Meanwhile, at the hospital, James Morgan made an unexpected appearance. He walked in with a nonchalant expression, as if nothing had happened. Everyone stopped in their tracks, staring at him with eyes full of hatred. What the hell are you doing here? Elena lunged at him, her eyes burning with fury. James smirked, looking at her with disdain. I just came to check on the baby's condition. You have no right. Elena screamed. Carmen Jimenez stepped forward, her voice dripping with contempt. You abandoned him on his mother's grave, and now you dare to pretend you care. James crossed his arms, his face cold as ice. I don't recall doing anything. Do you have proof? Elena clenched her fists, rage surging inside her. You won't get away with this, James. Sooner or later, the police will uncover the truth. James scoffed. Good luck. Do you really think you can go up against me? He turned on his heel and walked away, leaving behind a room filled with seething anger and hatred. The moment James left, an alarm blared through the hospital. Doctors and nurses rushed toward the emergency room. Elena's heart pounded as she sprinted after them. What's happening? She shouted. Sophia Reed ran out, her face pale. Matthew's condition has worsened. We're trying to save him. Elena collapsed to her knees, tears pouring down her face. No. Matthew, you can't give up. Carmen wrapped her arms around Elena tightly, and together, they prayed in despair. Inside, the doctors fought for every second to keep the tiny life from slipping away. Outside, the town was engulfed in worry and outrage. Everyone knew, if baby Matthew didn't survive, James would be the most cursed man for the rest of his life. Elena Garcia sat in a chair outside the emergency room, her eyes filled with fear. Every passing minute felt like torture. Matthew was still teetering between life and death, and there was nothing she could do but pray. Beside her, Carmen Jimenez was just as anxious. The baby will be okay, Elena. He's strong. Elena clasped her hands together so tightly that her nails dug into her palms, stinging with pain. I can't let James win. If Matthew survives, I must fight for custody. The emergency room doors suddenly swung open. Dr. Ryan Carter stepped out, his face weary. Elena and Carmen immediately jumped to their feet. Doctor, how is Matthew? Elena asked, her voice shaking. Ryan removed his mask and let out a heavy sigh. We have stabilized him for now, but his condition is still very weak. We need to monitor him closely for at least the next 48 hours. Elena nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Thank you, doctor. Thank you for saving him. Ryan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his gaze filled with sympathy. You need to be prepared. If he survives, you'll have a long battle ahead to keep him with you. Elena lifted her head, determination blazing in her eyes. I won't let anyone take Matthew away from me. Just hours later, shocking news spread through town. James Morgan had hired one of the best lawyers to block Elena from gaining custody of Matthew. At the Central Town Cafe, Michael Adams and Alexander Roberts sat discussing the situation. That bastard doesn't want to raise the child, but he also won't let Elena have custody. What the hell does he want? Alexander fumed. Michael took a sip of his coffee, his expression deep in thought. James doesn't care about the baby. He just wants control. If Elena wins, he'll lose face. Alexander gritted his teeth. We have to do something, Chief. We can't let him control this game. Michael set his cup down, his eyes turning ice cold. Let him play. But we'll be the ones to end this game. At the hospital, Elena sat across from her personal lawyer, Nathan Bennett. Nathan was a man in his 40s, serious and highly experienced in child custody disputes. He regarded Elena thoughtfully. Elena, I won't lie to you. We're up against a man with money and power. Without solid evidence against him, the court might not grant you custody of Matthew. Elena clenched her fists. I can't let him win. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that I'm the best person to raise Matthew. Nathan nodded. Then we need a strategy. First, I need you to tell me everything you know about James, especially anything that proves he's irresponsible. Elena thought for a moment before answering. He never cared about my sister. Throughout Maria's pregnancy, he never once checked on her. When she needed help, he ignored her. Nathan nodded. Good. We'll gather more information from the hospital, Maria's neighbors, anyone who can testify. For the first time in days, Elena felt a glimmer of hope. She no longer felt completely powerless. That night, as Elena sat beside Matthew's bed, a young nurse named Clara Ruiz quietly stepped into the room. Clara hesitated for a moment before whispering, Ms. Elena. I have something important to tell you. Elena looked up, frowning. What is it? Clara glanced around as if afraid someone might overhear. I work the night shifts here, and I saw James Morgan at the hospital 2 nights ago. Elena stiffened. What was he doing here? Clara swallowed hard. I don't know. He just stood outside the intensive care unit, staring inside for a long time before leaving. I wanted to ask him why he was there, but he avoided me. Elena's heart pounded. Why would he come here? Could he be connected to Matthew being abandoned? Clara shook her head. I don't have proof, but if you need my testimony, I'm willing to help. Elena gripped Clara's hand, her voice filled with gratitude. Thank you. I won't let him get away with this. At the police station, Michael Adams received a report from Alexander. Chief, we have a problem. James Morgan was at the hospital the night Matthew was found. Michael froze for a second before immediately standing up. Are you sure? Alexander nodded. Clara Ruiz, a nurse, confirmed it. But we need more evidence to charge him. Michael thought for a moment, then made up his mind. From now on, we monitor him closely. If he does anything suspicious, I want to know immediately. Alexander nodded. Understood, Chief. Meanwhile, James Morgan sat in his luxurious office, swirling a glass of red wine. Across from him was Frank Castro, his personal attorney. I don't care about the kid, James shrugged. But I don't want Elena to win. No matter what, I need to keep control. Frank nodded. Leave it to me. I'll make the court believe Elena is unfit to raise a child. James sneered. Good. Let her see who really holds the power. Elena Garcia had never felt as alone and desperate as she did now. Everything was spiraling out of control, and she felt like she was fighting a monster that no one could touch. Baby Matthew was still lying in the incubator, each of his weak breaths like a knife slicing into Elena's heart. She couldn't let James win, but he had too many advantages. Worse yet, he had already begun his attack. In a prestigious law office in California, James Morgan sat across from Frank Castro, one of the most experienced attorneys in child custody disputes. Frank flipped through the documents on Elena, narrowing his eyes. She has no stable income, no prior experience raising a child, and a history of depression after her sister's death. James smirked, his voice dripping with contempt. So basically, she doesn't stand a chance of winning, does she? Frank smirked. It won't be that easy. The court will prioritize close blood relatives, and Elena is the baby's biological aunt. But we can steer the case in another direction. James crossed his arms, raising an eyebrow. What do you mean? Frank intertwined his fingers, speaking slowly. We'll prove she lacks the financial means to raise a newborn. Furthermore, if we can find or create any evidence suggesting she has mental health issues, we can easily remove her from the case. James chuckled, lifting his wine glass and taking a sip. I like the way you think. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Elena sat with her lawyer, Nathan Bennett. James has hired Frank Castro, Nathan informed her, his face serious. Elena frowned. I've heard of him. A snake in human form. Nathan nodded. He's a master at smearing his opponents. I need you to be extremely careful in the coming days. If anyone approaches you with unusual questions, don't answer. Anything you say can be twisted against you. Elena clenched her fists, a mix of anger and fear surging through her. I'm not afraid of him. I'm just afraid I won't be strong enough to protect Matthew. Nathan looked at her, his eyes filled with determination. We won't let James win. That night, Clara Ruiz, the nurse who had seen James mysteriously appear at the hospital, received a strange message. Unknown number, you know too much. Stay silent if you don't want trouble. Clara turned pale, her heart pounding wildly. Someone was warning her to keep quiet. She immediately called Elena. Elena, I think someone is watching me. I just received a threatening message. Elena gritted her teeth. It has to be James's people. He's trying to silence you. Clara trembled. Should I report this to the police? Elena nodded. You need to. If he's desperate enough to threaten you, it means we're getting close to the truth. At the police station, Chief Michael Adams was reviewing surveillance footage. Alexander Roberts tapped the screen. Chief, this is from the hospital on the night James showed up. He stood outside the intensive care unit for about 5 minutes before leaving. Michael nodded. Looks like he was checking to see if Matthew was still alive. Alexander clenched his fists. If that's the case, does that mean he's actually involved in abandoning the baby? Michael remained silent for a long moment before speaking slowly. We need more evidence. But I want him under 24/7 surveillance. Alexander nodded. Understood, Chief. Meanwhile, in a luxurious bar, James Morgan sat across from Eric Wallace, one of his most trusted men. James swirled his wine glass, his voice cold. I need you to take care of something for me. Eric raised an eyebrow. Who do you need me to deal with? James smirked. Nothing too drastic. But I need to make sure Clara Ruiz stays quiet. Make her scared enough to keep her mouth shut. Eric nodded. I'll handle it. James narrowed his eyes, his tone dripping with malice. One more thing. I want to know exactly what Elena and the police are up to. Keep an eye on them. Eric grinned. Consider it done, boss. The next morning, the hospital was once again filled with the sound of blaring alarms. Elena rushed toward the emergency room, her heart pounding. What's happening? Sophia Reed, the doctor overseeing Matthew's treatment, stepped out with a tense expression. His condition has deteriorated again. We're doing everything we can. Elena collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. No. Matthew, you can't give up. Carmen Jimenez wrapped her arms around Elena, and together, they prayed in despair. Inside the hospital, the doctors fought for every second to keep the tiny life alive. Outside, the city of Los Angeles was engulfed in anxiety and outrage. Everyone knew that if Matthew didn't make it, James would be cursed for the rest of his life. Elena Garcia stood frozen outside the intensive care unit, tears streaming down her face as she watched little Matthew writhing on the hospital bed. The machines beeped incessantly, doctors rushed back and forth, moving urgently as if every second was invaluable. She couldn't breathe. Since the death of her sister, Elena had never felt this helpless and hopeless. Beside her, Carmen Jimenez gripped Elena's shoulder tightly, her voice trembling. Matthew will make it, won't he? Elena clenched her fists so hard that her nails dug deep into her palms, causing a sharp pain. If he doesn't survive, James is a murderer. At the police station, Alexander Roberts rushed into Michael Adams's office, his face showing clear excitement. Chief! I found what we need. Michael immediately looked up, his sharp eyes locking onto Alexander. Speak now. Alexander held up a file containing images extracted from the cemetery's security cameras. Look at this. That night, a man carried a bundle of cloth to Maria's grave. He placed the baby down, stood there for a few minutes, and then walked away. Michael stared intently at the image. That figure looked familiar. Enhance the image. Alexander nodded, working swiftly on his computer. A few moments later, the man's face in the video became clearer. Michael narrowed his eyes. Then his expression changed, his eyes widened, and his fingers clenched the edge of his desk. Damn it, that's Eric Wallace. James's most trusted henchman. Alexander was equally shocked. If he's the one who left the baby there, then James is definitely involved. Michael's voice was cold as steel. Now he has nowhere to hide. As soon as the police uncovered the truth, Elena also received the news. Without hesitation, she rushed to James's mansion, her hands shaking with rage as she pounded on the iron gate. James! Get out here now! A moment later, the gate swung open. James stepped out with a calm demeanor, his eyes filled with arrogance. What the hell are you doing? Elena stormed toward him, spitting out every word through gritted teeth. You are a monster. The police have the evidence. Your man was the one who left Matthew at the cemetery. James smirked, shrugging. Oh really? Do they have evidence, or just suspicions? Elena's anger boiled over, tears of fury streaming down her face as she screamed. How long are you going to deny it? Matthew might die. You tried to kill your own son. James stepped closer, his eyes sharp as a blade. I don't care. If he dies, even better. I don't need a weak son like that. Slap. Unable to hold back any longer, Elena struck James across the face with all her strength. He didn't flinch, didn't react to the pain. He simply smirked. You think I'm afraid of you, Elena? Elena glared at him, her eyes blazing. No. But you will be afraid of justice. She turned and walked away, but her heart was on fire with hatred. I will make you pay. News of James being a suspect in Matthew's abandonment spread throughout the town. People were furious, disgusted. At Carmen's cafe, conversations turned heated. How can someone be this cruel? He's not human, he's a demon. If Matthew doesn't survive, we will never forgive him. Carmen slammed her hand on the table, her eyes burning with anger. Whether Matthew lives or not, James must be punished. Everyone around her nodded in agreement, their shared hatred spreading through the town like a storm. Returning home, James felt uneasy for the first time. He turned on the TV, and what he saw made him clench his fists. Breaking news: the Los Angeles police are investigating the abandonment of an infant at a cemetery. The suspects include individuals closely associated with the deceased mother's family. According to unconfirmed sources, businessman James Morgan may be implicated in the case. Damn it! James threw his whiskey glass violently onto the floor, sending liquor splattering everywhere. This time, things were no longer within his control. He pulled out his phone and dialed Frank Castro, his lawyer. "We have a problem. Erase everything. I don't want a single piece of evidence left." Frank responded coldly. "Understood. I'll take care of it." James hung up, his grip tightening so much that the veins on his hand bulged. "No one can bring me down." The next morning, at the hospital, Dr. Sophia Reed rushed outside with a relieved smile. Elena and Carmen jumped to their feet, their hearts pounding. "Doctor, how is Matthew?" Sophia nodded, her voice full of emotion. "The baby has passed the critical stage. He's breathing more steadily now." Elena collapsed onto the chair, sobbing in relief. Carmen also shed tears and hugged Elena tightly. "We've won a battle, but the war isn't over yet." Elena nodded, her eyes burning with determination. "James won't get away with this." At the police station, Chief Michael Adams sat across from Eric Wallace, James Morgan's loyal henchman. In front of Eric was a thick file filled with evidence against him. "We have video footage of you placing the baby on Maria's grave," Michael said slowly, his gaze sharp. "Do you have anything to say?" Eric swallowed hard, sweat forming on his forehead. But he couldn't betray James. He knew that if he told the truth, he wouldn't survive. "I don't know anything," Eric growled. Michael slammed his hand on the table, his voice steely. "You think I'll believe that? If you don't talk, I can charge you as an accomplice to murder. Do you really think James will protect you?" Eric pressed his lips together, but he was starting to waver. Alexander Roberts, standing beside Michael, shook his head. "James sees you as nothing but a disposable pawn. If this all falls apart, he'll throw you under the bus without hesitation. Speak, Eric. This is your only chance." Eric bit his lip, his fingers interlocking tensely. Finally, he let out a deep sigh, his eyes darkening. "I wasn't the one making the decisions. I just followed orders." Michael narrowed his eyes. "Orders from whom?" Silence. Alexander gritted his teeth. "James Morgan, right?" Eric bit his lip again, then gave a small nod. Tension filled the room. Michael took a deep breath. Meanwhile, at James Morgan's mansion, he stood by the large window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his eyes filled with tension. The man who was once arrogant and powerful was now feeling the crushing weight of pressure. He was no longer in control of the situation. The office door burst open, and Frank Castro, his lawyer, walked in with a tense expression. "We have a problem. The police are interrogating Eric, and he could betray you at any moment." James tightened his grip on his glass of whiskey, his eyes flashing with fury. "He dares to betray me." Frank took a deep breath. "I've done everything I can to protect you, but the evidence against you is piling up. You need to be prepared." James threw the glass violently to the floor, shattering it into pieces. "No. I won't let them destroy me." Frank frowned. "So what do you plan to do? If you run now, you'll only be admitting your guilt." James let out a cold laugh. "Who said I was going to run?" At the hospital, Elena Garcia received a call from the police. "Miss Elena, we have Eric Wallace's statement. James Morgan is the mastermind. Elena stood still for a few seconds, then exhaled sharply, tears streaming down her face. Finally, justice is near. Carmen Jimenez clasped Elena's hands, her voice trembling with joy. We're about to win. Elena wiped her tears away, her eyes burning with determination. No. I'll only truly win when James is punished. News of James Morgan's involvement in Matthew's abandonment quickly spread throughout Los Angeles. The townspeople were filled with outrage. At Carmen's cafe, a crowd gathered to talk. He's a monster. A man like him doesn't deserve to exist. We can't let him walk free. Even those who once admired James began to distance themselves from him. Stores refused to serve him. Friends avoided him. His properties were vandalized. James Morgan, once wealthy and powerful, was becoming a man rejected by society. But he would never accept defeat. Knowing everything was collapsing, James secretly contacted a stranger. I need to leave the country immediately. The person on the other end of the line was silent for a moment. All right. But there's a price. James gritted his teeth. Whatever it takes. He wouldn't let himself be caught. He would escape. At the hospital, after days in the incubator, baby Matthew finally showed signs of recovery. Dr. Sophia Reed stepped out, delivering the good news. The baby's condition is improving. If nothing changes, he will make a full recovery soon. Elena burst into tears, hugging Carmen tightly. Matthew has defeated death. Everyone in the hospital clapped with joy. Carmen beamed. That little one is so strong. Elena gazed at Matthew through the glass, tears of happiness streaming down her face. You will grow up, stronger than ever. But she knew one thing still remained. James Morgan had yet to be punished. Just as James was about to leave town, the police stormed in. James Morgan, you are summoned for charges of child abandonment and involvement in Maria Garcia's murder. James turned pale but quickly regained his composure. I have no idea what you're talking about. Michael Adams stepped forward, looking him straight in the eyes. We have evidence. We have witnesses. This time, you won't escape. James clenched his fists, but deep down, he knew, this time, he had truly been cornered. James Morgan walked slowly out of his mansion, his eyes filled with contempt as he saw a group of police officers waiting at the gate. Michael Adams, the police chief, held up a summons. James Morgan, you are summoned for questioning regarding the charges of child abandonment and your involvement in Maria Garcia's death. James smirked, shaking his head. Do you really think you can do anything to me? Michael remained unfazed. We have enough evidence. You will answer to the law. James shrugged, feigning indifference. I'll cooperate. But I warn you, don't expect to convict me. In the interrogation room, James sat with his legs crossed, his gaze filled with arrogance as he looked at Michael and Alexander. Michael placed a stack of files on the table, his voice firm. James, this is Eric Wallace's statement. He admitted that you ordered Matthew to be abandoned on Maria's grave. James's brow furrowed slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. The testimony of someone under my command? That holds no legal value. Alexander slammed his hand on the table. Do you think we only have testimonies? This is footage from the security camera. It clearly shows Eric at the cemetery that night. And you're the only one with a motive. James scoffed. You have no direct evidence linking me to the crime. Michael narrowed his eyes, a sharp smile forming on his lips. It's not just that. We've also obtained messages between you and Frank Castro, where you ordered him to silence Nurse Clara Ruiz. And guess what? She has agreed to testify in court. James froze. For the first time, his composure began to crack. The interrogation room door swung open. Elena Garcia stepped inside, her eyes burning with intensity. "There's no way out for you, James." James let out a dry laugh, though some of his confidence had already faded. "Did you come here to relish your moment of glory?" Elena clenched her fists, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "I don't need glory. I just want justice. You killed my sister. You tried to kill my nephew. And now, you're going to pay." James lifted his chin defiantly. "You think I'll go to prison? Do you forget who I am?" Elena smirked, her eyes filled with contempt. "You're just a coward clinging to an illusion of power. But this time, you can't buy your way out." James pressed his lips together, his hands clenching into fists. Michael spoke coldly. "You're officially being indicted. Get ready, James." Meanwhile, at the prosecutor's office, attorney Nathan Bennett was working with the investigation team. "We need irrefutable evidence to convict James." Suddenly, Alexander Roberts burst into the room, his face alight with urgency. "We just found security footage from James' parking lot. It shows Eric entering his mansion just before heading to the cemetery." Nathan's eyes widened. "My God!" The trial begins. 3 days later, at the Los Angeles courthouse, James Morgan officially stood trial. The courtroom was packed, filled with people eager to see the ruthless man finally face justice. Elena sat in the front row, her eyes filled with determination. The judge banged the gavel. "Let's begin the trial." Prosecutor Nathan Bennett rose to his feet, presenting each piece of evidence before the court: Eric's testimony, the security footage, and the threatening messages to Clara. James sat motionless, his face drained of all color. After hours of heated debate, the jury reached a verdict. James Morgan is guilty of child abandonment and involvement in the death of Maria Garcia. The courtroom erupted. James shot to his feet, shouting in fury. "You can't do this to me. I am James Morgan." But the judge remained unfazed. "This court sentences you to 20 years in prison." James went pale, his entire body trembling with rage. But no one cared about him anymore. A new beginning. A few days later, at the hospital, Elena held Matthew in her arms, tears of happiness streaming down her face. Carmen embraced them both, her voice choked with emotion. "At last, we won." Elena gazed at Matthew and whispered softly. "You will grow up surrounded by love, free from the darkness." Matthew slowly opened his eyes, his tiny hand gripping Elena's fingers, as if sensing the safety around him. This was their new beginning. 3 days after the trial, at Los Angeles Hospital, the atmosphere was no longer as gloomy as before. For the first time after countless days filled with tears, Elena Garcia felt her heart grow lighter. She stood at the doorway of the hospital room, her gaze soft as she looked inside. Matthew was no longer in the incubator. The baby was now sleeping peacefully on a small bed, his skin looking rosier, his breathing steady. Carmen Jimenez stepped up beside her and whispered. "What did the doctor say?" Elena turned to her, her eyes brimming with tears but also filled with hope. "They said he's out of danger. If he continues to recover well, he could be discharged in a few days." Carmen hugged Elena, tears of joy streaming down her face. "My God, we finally have a miracle." Elena stepped into the room and gently sat beside Matthew's bed. She reached out, her fingers lightly touching the baby's tiny hand. Suddenly, Matthew opened his eyes. In that moment, their gazes met the child and the woman who had fought with everything she had to protect him. Matthew stirred, then instinctively grasped Elena's finger tightly. Elena broke down in tears, drops of joy and happiness rolling down her cheeks. "My dear, you're finally awake." The baby moved slightly, his lips parting to let out a faint yet full of life sound. Carmen covered her mouth, trying to hold back a sob. "He knows you're his family, Elena." He recognizes you. Elena nodded, pressing a soft kiss on Matthew's tiny hand, silently vowing to protect him with her entire life. 2 days later, family court, Elena stood before the judge, waiting for the most important decision of her life. Attorney Nathan Bennett sat beside her and gave a reassuring nod. Your case is strong. You have nothing to worry about. But Elena's heart still pounded. She had fought too hard, endured too much pain. She could not afford to lose Matthew. The judge reviewed the documents before looking up and declaring, based on the evidence and the child's condition, the court grants guardianship of Matthew Garcia to Ms. Elena Garcia. The courtroom fell silent for a moment. Then, Elena broke down in tears, covering her mouth in overwhelming emotion. Carmen hugged her tightly, whispering through sobs. You did it, Elena. You saved him. Nathan smiled in satisfaction and shook Elena's hand. You deserve this. Elena clutched the custody papers to her chest, her vision blurred with tears. Finally, Matthew was her son. After leaving the courthouse, Elena returned to the hospital. She sat beside Matthew and gently held his tiny hand. My beloved son, from now on, you will have a beautiful name. Carmen, curious, asked, have you chosen one? Elena nodded, her voice filled with love. Matthew. It means, gift from God. Carmen smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. That's right. He truly is a gift. When news of Elena's official adoption of Matthew spread, the entire town erupted in joy. At Carmen's cafe, people gathered to celebrate and congratulate Elena. Finally, a happy ending. Matthew will grow up surrounded by love. Elena deserves all of this. No one spoke of James anymore. He had become a thing of the past, a forgotten name. 3 weeks later, Elena officially brought Matthew home. The house was small but warm, filled with love. Carmen helped Elena set up a nursery, decorating it with colorful paintings and placing a small crib inside. Elena held Matthew in her arms and whispered, This is your home, my son. This is where you will grow up, safe and happy. Matthew stretched his tiny hand, touching Elena's cheek, as if he could feel her love. From that day forward, Elena's life completely changed. She was no longer alone. Now, she had Matthew. Carmen frequently visited to help and share in the joy of raising him. Every morning, Elena woke up to find Matthew sleeping peacefully in her arms. Every afternoon, she pushed the stroller through town, receiving warm smiles and blessings from the neighbors. Every evening, she lulled the baby to sleep, whispering to him about Maria, the mother who had loved him with all her heart. You will always be loved, my son. The story of Matthew, the baby once abandoned on his mother's grave but miraculously surviving, became a legend in the town. People passed it down as a symbol of kindness and the power of love. And on Maria's grave, Elena always placed a bouquet of flowers, whispering, Sister, you can rest in peace now. Matthew is happy. 3 months later, the town of Los Angeles was filled with a sense of peace. Life gradually returned to normal, but no one forgot the story of Matthew, the child once abandoned but who had fought and survived against all odds. In Elena Garcia's small home, the atmosphere was warm and filled with love. In the little crib, baby Matthew giggled, waving his tiny hands with pure joy. Elena sat beside him, smiling softly. My son, do you know what day it is today? Carmen Jimenez entered, carrying a basket of pastries, her face beaming. Today is Matthew's 4-month birthday. Elena picked Matthew up, kissing his forehead gently. You've grown so much stronger, my son. That afternoon, Elena took Matthew to the Los Angeles cemetery, the place where it all began. She stood before Maria's grave, gently placing a bouquet of white chrysanthemums. Sister, Matthew is growing up healthy. He smiles a lot, and his eyes look just like yours. A gentle breeze passed through, as if a blessing from the departed. Carmen stepped beside her, whispering. Who would have thought that a place once filled with sorrow would become a symbol of life? Indeed, the Los Angeles cemetery was no longer just a place of grief. It had become a testament to the strength of love and kindness. The townspeople no longer visited just to mourn their loved ones, but also to reflect on Matthew's story, the baby who had been abandoned on his mother's grave but was saved by those with warm hearts. From the day she adopted Matthew, Elena no longer felt alone. Every morning, she woke up to his smile. Every night, she rocked him to sleep, singing the lullabies Maria used to sing. There were times she felt exhausted, nights when Matthew cried endlessly, but she never once regretted it. I'm here, Matthew. Mommy will always be with you. Matthew babbled his first sounds, his round eyes gazing at Elena with the purest love. Carmen laughed warmly. Just looking at you two makes me happy. Elena held Matthew tighter, whispering. I will spend my whole life protecting him. Meanwhile, in California State Prison, James Morgan was no longer the wealthy, powerful man he once was. He sat silently in his cell, his face hollow, his hair unkempt. No one remembered him anymore. Friends, colleagues, those who once praised him, all had turned their backs. The other inmates despised him, a man who had everything yet was cruel enough to abandon his own child. You're the worst person I've ever met, one prisoner spat as he passed by. James said nothing, only lowering his head. For the first time in his life, he felt truly alone. No more money. No more power. Only four cold walls and a past he could never undo. He had lost everything. One day, a journalist from California came to see Elena. We want to write an article about you and Matthew. Elena was slightly taken aback. Why? The journalist smiled. Because this is a story that deserves to be told. A story of life, kindness, and justice. Elena looked at Matthew, then nodded gently. The story of the baby on his mother's grave quickly spread. Many people read it and were moved to tears. This world still holds miracles. Love can heal everything. And so, the story became part of the memory of the town of Los Angeles. One bright morning, Elena carried Matthew out into the garden, where the sunlight bathed them in warmth. Carmen approached, smiling. What are you two up to today? Elena smiled, gazing at Matthew. We're going for a walk. My son needs to know that the world is beautiful. Matthew giggled, his eyes shining like the sun. Elena held him close, feeling the warmth of his tiny body in her arms. This was true happiness. That night, Elena rocked Matthew to sleep, whispering like a promise. My son, no matter what happens, I will always be with you. I will never leave you. A soft breeze drifted through the window, bringing an unexpected sense of peace. Somewhere far away, Maria was surely smiling. And in the present, Elena, Matthew, and the entire town of Los Angeles knew that this story was more than just a memory. It was proof of kindness, love, and justice. The story of Matthew and Elena is a testament to the power of love, kindness, and justice. It teaches us that even in the darkest moments, there is still light and hope. Elena's resilience shows that love can overcome any hardship, while James's tragic fate serves as a reminder that cruelty and selfishness always come with a price. In the end, justice may come late, but it will never be forgotten. Kindness will always create miracles.